Hey, how's it going, guys? We're gonna do tier lists today because tier lists are popular and they make money, and classic WoW content videos are popular and they make money. So let's combine the two so I can make more money. Anyway, this is our tier list. So S is gonna be the pristine, the perfect dungeon, near perfect. And F is gonna be just a complete waste of time in terms of loot, in terms of time it takes to navigate, in terms of boss fights, all that. I consider navigation to be a very important aspect of a dungeon, the ability to get through it, the ability to have, fun getting through it. But I also admire intricacy and grand design, as you'll see in a little bit. So first off, let's just grab one at random. How about, Shadowfang Keep. Shadowfang Keep, I feel, has been a decent dungeon, but it's not really exceptional. Might have been if you were doing quests for it, like, you had to go back there a bunch of times, so maybe you got used to it. I know warlocks had to go back there, and some classes had to do their class quests, But overall, I just feel like it was never that great. It was fun, but it was very mediocre as far as dungeon design goes. It was just a castle. So I'm gonna actually put it in the C tier. Just an alright dungeon. Doesn't mean it's bad because there's more tiers above it. It's just a decent dungeon. Kind of average. Sometimes it goes a little bit above average, but not enough. Gnomeregan. I'm actually going to put this one in the B tier. The reason why it gets the B tier is because it's a very intricately designed dungeon. It's got a lot of cool stuff going on for it. So, yes, navigation for it isn't the best, but you can get used to it. It is still kind of linear enough to understand it. You get the option of grabbing a key later on to open up the door to the final boss, which is cool. You have a bunch of shortcuts. You have the punch card system, which was really cool. And you can also pick up grime-encrusted objects from that zone and take them to a neutral rest area, the clean room, and get extra loot from that. So it was really cool. There's a lot of cool bosses in that dungeon. The final boss is really nice, and he drops some awesome loot. So Gnomeregan is definitely getting the B tier, especially considering that Horde also benefit to get to this dungeon because it's actually fairly easy for them to get here. It's not as difficult as you'd think, which is nice forward thinking by Blizzard to favor both sides. Alright, let's try Zul'Farrak. Zul'Farrak's gonna go in the S tier. It's a very easy dungeon to navigate. It's a troll dungeon, there's some cool bosses there. Of course, you have the carrot on the stick fight. A lot of people will debate about the pyramid fight, in which you have to fight off waves of enemies on top of a pyramid, and then you go down and you kill the people that you were just defending. Spoilers. But I actually really like that. I thought it was a cool idea, and it kind of felt like a two-part boss fight. So, Zul'Farrak has some fun bosses. It's easy to navigate. It's got a lot of loot, a lot of cool areas in it. It's definitely worthy of the S tier. It's an amazing dungeon. Uldaman. We're going to put this guy in the A tier. Uldaman is a really cool dungeon because it's just got so much lore attached to it. It's got all kinds of bosses. It's a little bit tricky to navigate, but there's all kinds of different areas you can go to. So it's a really cool dungeon, and it's got some awesome loot. So an A tier for Uldaman. Ragefire Chasm. I wanted to put this in the A tier, but as far as dungeon design goes, it's very middle of the road. It's great as an introductory dungeon for people just getting into the game. It's very linear. You know what you're doing. So for that, I'm just going to put it in the C tier. I did want to put it in the A tier because it is a well-designed dungeon for newbies. But I do feel that, it's not a great design. It's very similar lava and a giant path to the final boss. It's not really significant. Dire Maul. Now, Dire Maul has some pretty glaring issues in that if you just played it for the core leveling, you didn't do tributes, you didn't do all the cool stuff that's inside Dire Maul, I'd say that this dungeon is actually a B tier if you consider everything. All the wings, how intricate it is. Some of the quests are boring, some of the boss fights are not great, and the layout can be very confusing. It's also very huge, but a lot of stuff does happen there, and unlike Shadowfang Keep, it is a little bit more interesting. I'm a little bit biased because I did get my Warlock mount from Dire Maul, so it's getting the B tier. Razorfen Crawl. Honestly, gonna put in the C tier. Not a fan of Quillboar's beasts. I just felt that the designs of the bosses in that dungeon were very generic. But Razorfen Downs, on the other hand, more Scourge themed. Undead are in this dungeon, which is pretty cool. So there's a little bit more going on for it. So I like that quite a bit. Stockades. We're putting this guy in the F tier. The Stockades is a generic, boring. It's generic, boring prison dungeon. That's what it is in an RPG. It's fantasy prison dungeon RPG. The dungeon. It's uninteresting. It's got some mediocre loot, and the way you can pull ads in that area is just absolutely insane. How designed is. It's very cramped. There's not much you can do. It's very easy to screw up and get yourself killed, which, you know, it should be challenging, but it's really tedious. Sunken Temple, that's going in the D tier. Now you might say, wow, if Stockades is getting F tier, why isn't Sunken Temple F tier as well? Because Sunken Temple actually has interesting architecture, it's got some fun boss fights, and it's got some really good loot. It's just a pain in the ass to navigate. It's one of the worst dungeons in the game to navigate, but it makes up for it with the other things that it's got going for it. Blackrock Depths. That is going... Ooh, A tier. It's very close to being S tier for me. But as far as this dungeon goes, it's really nice in that it's huge. Like, it's one of the most ambitious dungeons Blizzard has ever made. They so ambitious they had to split it up into a bunch of parts for Cataclysm, like Dire Maul. Well, Dire Maul was already kind of split up, but you get my point. They took a dungeon that you're meant to do kind of all at once, and they just completely separated it out and chunked it out. But Blackrock Depths, it's really cool because you have... It's almost like a zone. You have keys to get around. You have areas where you can do all kinds of quests or class professions like the Black Forge. You have the access to Molten Core there as well. You have tons of quests for this area. Lots of lore, lots of interesting things going on. It's great for the various things you're going to need throughout the game, like your class quests, and it's also home to doing the Onyxia Attunement, which is pretty cool. So it is a pain in the ass to navigate, though. On vanilla, it's absolutely terrible. So I'm putting in the A tier because it's just so intricate. It's so crazy, and the bar is like the highlight for that dungeon, but that's why it's not in the D tier with Sunken Temple. There's just so much going on for it. Alright, Strathel. I'm going to put this in... Oh, God. You know, let's come back to this one later, because I have a lot to say. Okay. Black Fathom Deeps. This is an okay dungeon, honestly. It's not terrible. It's not very good. But I do think it is better than something like Sunken Temple, because it's just not... It doesn't really commit any crimes. It's got a nice little underwater area. It's just an underwater cave, but it's nice, damp, dark kind of vibe to it. I don't know, I kind of like it. And the Cataclysm version was a little bit better. Alright, Wailing Caverns is going in the D tier. This dungeon is... If Ragefire Chasm was like a good example of a low B dungeon, this is a terrible one. The navigation isn't great. It's a little bit confusing to get to every boss. There's some really great loot, which is why it doesn't get in the F tier. But for a Horde dungeon, it was just pretty boring, and also it was a little bit out of the way to get to it. It was just not very good. Not very good. I just don't have much to say about it. Lower Blackrock Spire. If Blackrock Depths was confusing but very intricate and fun, Lower Blackrock Spire is the complete opposite. It's terrible to navigate through. It's a forgettable dungeon. It's just boring orcs, which are not as cool as Dark Iron Dwarves, even the name sounds cooler. Blackrock Orcs. Dark Iron Dwarves. It just sounds way more fantasy-like. I know some people like this dungeon because, you know, vanilla, and it was part of getting into, I think, Upper Blackrock Spire. I might be wrong about that, which was way better in design. But I just found Lower to always be incredibly tedious, and I've had just nightmares from that place. It's just absolutely terrible. And this is my list, so suck it. All right, Scarlet Monastery. This is going in the B tier because you have to count the whole thing, and I think Armory and Cathedral are good, but Graveyard and I think Courtyard are not as good, and they kind of balance each other out, but I think that the highs of this dungeon were really cool. It's got some great lore to it, some interesting boss fights, but they kind of self-contained everything, and they pretty much ended the Scarlet storyline and all that with the beginning of Lich King, so they didn't really expand upon this too much ever. The Scarlet Crusade just kind of died, which was a wasted opportunity. I mean, there was some stuff in Stratholme, I believe, but just, whatever. Okay, Maradon. That's gonna go in... I think it's below Dire Maw. Maradon, some of the cave areas are just really boring to go through. There's a really cool area where you fight the princess with the waterfalls. Those are cool, but other than that, I think some of the enemies it's just a lot of centaurs and rock golems. There were some cool areas. Anytime there was water on display, it was really cool. But I just think it lacks soul for all the bosses and the enemies, because other than that, the design is mostly good. There's some good variety, but I just feel like it's a cave version of Dire Maw with less interesting stuff going on for it. No tribute runs or anything like that. Skullments? I'll put that in the B tier. That was a pretty good dungeon overall. It was a little bit frustrating at times, but I feel like, it had some cool loot, had some fun bosses, cool area. Really cool loot if you count the Barav Peasant Collar. That was a really cool trinket everyone wanted. Really liked that thing. But not the most significant, but, definitely cool. It also had a lot of necessary resistance gear for back in vanilla, so you needed that. Stratholme. I'm going to put that in the A tier. I was thinking B, but I'm going to put it in A because Stratholme is actually a really fun, well-built dungeon. It's got a lot to it, a lot of loot, a lot of areas to go to. And it's also like the area where you can go to, Naxxramas is right next to it. I'm trying to think of the other reasons why. Oh, there's the Scarlet section, which is really cool. You got that Cannonball Runner trinket, I think, there, as well as the flute, I think, which I actually did end up getting on an alt, but then when they added the toy system into the game, I could have it on all my characters, which was nice. So, yeah, cool loot, Undead, Scarlet, I think there's a Dreadlord there too, and I think you can get a Tiche there as well, as part of the quest line, which is interesting. But yeah, it's not very much to look at, and there is some confusing aspects to how you navigate, and there's some hidden stuff it's not really clear when you do the dungeon, but when you really look into it, and if you have a map especially, it's a really fun place. Alright, Dead Mines, the last one. I'm going to put this in S tier. This is the best low-level dungeon that Blizzard has ever made. Or one of the best. You have the cave area, which is, so-so. Then you have the forge area with all the fire. You get another cave, but then you get the Defias pirate ship area, which is awesome. It shows you some backstory to Stormwind's lore, how it was built. And you actually feel like you're the bad guys, because you basically are killing a bunch of wage workers that built Stormwind. So, yeah, they've been labeled as thieves now. But Van Cleef was a fun fight. You have Cookie, of course. I can remember most of them. Sneed. It was just a really interesting, fun dungeon. The only problem was the aggro and the patrols. If you were playing first time, it was very easy to just screw up and, die and wipe your group because you pulled the wrong thing. But, it's a good, solid dungeon. It's great. I have nothing much more to say about it. Good loot, obviously, because, it was the first dungeon for Alliance. Everyone did that. A lot of Horde characters, they decided not to do Wailing Caverns, and they actually went to Dead Mines, which I always find to be amusing. Blizzard always favors Alliance. But anyway, guys, that's it for this long-winded tier list. Please give me money. No, I'm just kidding. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much for watching. I'm out.